First day, and already the game is rigged. His name misspelled. His desk missing. His presence barely acknowledged. Around him, the champagne flows, polished smiles flash, and interns laugh like they've already made partner. He gets none of that. Instead, subtle nods, silent stares, and a welcome colder than the boardroom air. Black, brilliant, invisible. They label him before he speaks, decide his worth before he works, and clip his wings before he lifts. But what they don't know is that every insult, every microcut, every smirk dripping with entitlement is being recorded, not with cameras, but with precision, memory, and resolve. And when the moment comes, it won't be loud. It'll be surgical. For firings, $3.1 billion erased in bonuses. One name they all remember, the one they mocked. This is not just a story, it's a reckoning. Like what you're hearing. Subscribe for the full unraveling. Hit the comments. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done if no one in the room saw you coming? Langston Price walked into the marble-clad lobby of Hawthorne and Roth's global headquarters with the poise of someone who'd earned every step. Dressed in a charcoal suit that had cost him 3 weeks of tutoring gigs, his stride was calculated, composed. His resume read like a case study in overachievement. Top 1% at Columbia, fluent in Mandarin, co-founder of a fintech startup acquired during his junior year. He belonged here, or so he thought. At the check-in desk, a receptionist with frosted pink lipstick and a headset barely glanced up. "Name?" she asked, distracted by her screen. "Langston Price," he said, offering a polite smile. Her acrylics clicked rapidly over the keyboard before she handed him a lanyard. It read, "Langston Price Summer Admin Support." He hesitated. "Actually, it's Langston. Price with AY." The woman frowned. "That's what the system says." She waved him aside. Next, Langston stepped toward the elevators with the badge digging into his chest like an insult. He pressed the button and waited alone. The mirrored doors reflected his tailored confidence, but something gnawed at him. Just a clerical error, he told himself. Minor glitch, nothing to take personally. But upstairs, the welcome event told a different story. The top floor had been transformed into a glossy showroom of corporate hospitality. Trays of hors d'oeuvres floated through the crowd. String musicians filled the space with soft jazz, and the entire intern cohort, 35 polished faces, milled about sipping champagne. Near the bar, a banner read, "HNR Summer Investment Associates Welcome, Future Leaders." Langston approached a check-in table where 2 women in matching navy sheath dresses handed out envelopes. One of them looked up and smiled faintly. "Oh, hi. Are you with facilities?" She handed him an envelope without checking. It read, "Supply Chain Group 4. "I'm actually one of the interns," Langston said. Her brow furrowed. "Oh," she muttered, flipping through a nearby folder. She found another envelope, this one already creased. "Here, Group 4. No apology, no recognition, just the mechanical pivot of someone who didn't think twice. Behind him, 2 interns exchanged a look. One of them whispered, "He doesn't look like a Langston." The other laughed. "Maybe he's Laquan after all." Langston heard them. He didn't react. The icebreaker began, led by a director with slicked back hair and the voice of a game show host. "Let's go around the room," he said. "Name, school, and a fun fact." Langston waited his turn. When it came, he kept his voice steady. "Langston Price, Columbia University. I co-founded a fintech startup that was acquired last fall." There was a flicker of surprise in a few faces. The director offered a tight nod. Next, Chad. Chad was from Yale. His fun fact was being allergic to mangoes. He got more laughs. After the intros, the director handed out assignment packets. Groups 1 and 2 were assigned to live client accounts. Group 3 would shadow M&A teams. Group 4, Langston's group, was tasked with infrastructure logistics. One of his teammates, a fratty finance bro named Brent, snorted. "Guess we're building shelves." Langston opened his packet. The first task, conduct an inventory of supply room A17. By mid-afternoon, the other interns were touring the trading floor with division heads. Langston found himself in a narrow hallway surrounded by mops and printer paper. A junior analyst popped her head in. "Hey Langston, can you help us move a few boxes to the boardroom? They need chairs too." He nodded without arguing. At the boardroom, he passed by Group 1 mid-pitch. Inside, whiteboards bore strategy flowcharts. Outside, he pushed chairs past them like an invisible extra on a set he didn't belong to. The day dragged. When the corporate photographer arrived to take professional headshots for the company site, Langston queued up behind a few others. The photographer looked at his badge and frowned. "Group 4? Sorry, today's just Groups 1 through 3. Langston stood there, confused. "But we're part of the program." The photographer shrugged. "They didn't include you on the schedule." Langston turned and walked away without protest. Near the espresso bar, a cluster of interns huddled around a tablet, reviewing slides. Langston approached. "Is that the mock portfolio?" he asked. A girl in Gucci loafers glanced up. "Yeah, for Group 1. Langston smiled. "Cool. I'd love to take a look. I'm trying to see how we're all dividing things." She shifted her body, blocking the screen. "We were told to stay within our own project scopes." "Sorry." Another intern smirked. "It's not like yours has client exposure." Langston stepped back. His knuckles whitened as he gripped his folder. The final straw came at 4:47 p.m. An email pinged his phone. Subject: urgent. It was from facilities. Langston. Confusion at loading dock. "Can you sign for toner delivery and direct to storage B?" He read it twice. The sender wasn't even from his department. He replied, "Sure." At that moment, it felt easier than explaining why he shouldn't be asked. When he returned upstairs, the reception area was quiet. Interns were exchanging contact info, laughter spilling across the floor. One group took a selfie with a partner. Langston paused near the elevator, unseen. He caught a voice from a nearby intern. "That new guy, Langston, or whatever, he's either lost or hired to make the brochure look diverse." Another voice chimed in. "Yeah, I saw him wheeling chairs. DEI is wild these days." The next morning, Langston Price arrived early, determined to turn the page on yesterday's humiliations. He stepped off the elevator into a quieter version of the gleaming 43rd floor, his breath slow and focused. His suit was pressed, tie crisp, leather portfolio tucked under his arm like a shield. He'd spent the night reviewing company structures, recent mergers, even memorizing the names of key partners. Today, he told himself, he would earn visibility the old-fashioned way, through competence. But when he reached the operations bullpen, the desk bearing his name tag was wedged between a copier and a file cabinet, tucked out of view like an afterthought. His teammates from Group 4 were scattered elsewhere, comfortably seated in plush rolling chairs with panoramic views. His chair was plastic. No monitor, no phone, no welcome. Just a laminated inventory team badge stuck to the wall. Langston scanned the area for a manager or a coordinator, someone to clarify the seating error. There was none. A low voice called out from across the partition. "Hey, Lang, a guy. We need a few extra binders from B19. You mind grabbing those?" Langston turned. The speaker was Brent again, wearing an unbuttoned dress shirt and an untucked smirk. Langston replied evenly, "Actually, I wanted to ask if we're going to be looped into the asset management simulations today. I reviewed the client tracker, thought we might shadow a team." Brent chuckled. "You thought wrong. Bro Group 4's doing physical audits this week. We're the backbone, so they say." The word stung, not because of the work, but the assumption. By 10 o'clock, Langston found himself hauling office chairs from one end of the floor to the other, charting broken monitors, checking expiry labels on printer ink. The form he'd been handed by HR wasn't digital. It was a dog-eared, coffee-stained checklist with color-coded stickers. As he stooped to count Ethernet cables, he passed a glass conference room where interns from Group 2 were deep in debate over a client restructuring strategy. One of them, Emily, caught his eye and offered a half-wave before glancing away quickly, almost guiltily. Inside, a VP tapped at a whiteboard, drawing arrows between subsidiaries. Outside, Langston ticked a box labeled "Stapler Functional." By noon, he sat alone in the storage annex, eating a cold turkey sandwich in silence. The air smelled like old toner and cardboard. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the intern group chat. Someone had shared a meme, a stock photo of a janitor with the caption, "When DI hires, start shadowing facilities." The laughing emojis piled in fast. One comment read, "Langston be like, I run this floor literally." Another, "At least he's visible, mopping counts." Langston stared at the screen, expressionless. He didn't reply, didn't leave the group. He just turned his phone over and stared at the gray wall. At 1:30, a junior analyst named Diego passed him in the hall and paused. "Hey dude, you're Langston, right?" Langston looked up. "Yeah." Diego hesitated. "They assigned you to logistics?" "That's different." Langston gave a tight nod. Apparently, Diego looked uneasy. "Just saying, when I was an intern, Group 4 got disbanded. Weird they brought it back." Then he walked away, leaving Langston with more questions and fewer answers. By 2:15, Langston was told to restock the beverage fridge in the client lounge. As he knelt beside a half-empty crate of LaCroix, arranging cans by flavor, two senior managers walked in mid-conversation. "These interns get coddled too much," one said. "I miss when we made them grind, earn it." The other laughed. "Except the DEI ones. They get gold stars just for showing up." Neither noticed Langston. Or maybe they did, but they didn't stop talking. Later that day, Langston attempted to attend a Future Leaders seminar advertised on the company calendar. He arrived 5 minutes early, only to be stopped by a receptionist at the door. "Sorry, this is by invite only." Langston frowned. The link was public. The receptionist scanned her list. "You're not on it." He glanced inside. There was Zoe, Brent, and half a dozen other interns. They didn't look surprised to see him turned away. He returned to his desk, only to find it occupied. A man from IT was disconnecting wires. "This cubicle's being reassigned," he said. "You'll have to relocate to the basement overflow." Langston blinked. "There's no outlet down there." The man shrugged. "Not my call." By 5 o'clock, Langston's white shirt was wrinkled, his shoes scuffed, his spirit quieter than when he'd arrived. He stood near the exit waiting for an elevator, posture tight. A group of interns stepped in ahead of him, chatting about weekend plans in the Hamptons. One glanced back and said, "Sorry, capacity." The doors closed. Langston stared at the floor numbers blinking down. He waited for the next one. That, he knew, would only make things worse. But he'd resolved to keep his head down and fight for dignity in the only way he'd been taught, with work, excellence, results. Yet as he stepped into the main atrium, it was clear things had taken another turn. A large glass wall in the lobby now displayed rotating bios of selected interns, faces of the future. Langston paused to watch. Bright photos of Brent, Zoe, Emily, and others flashed across the screen with taglines. Yale, Market Strategy, Vision, Wharton, M&A Simulation, Execution. His own face was nowhere to be found. Neither was anyone from Group 4. He continued to the elevators and rode up to the 31st floor, a floor he hadn't seen since orientation. His access badge now worked again, perhaps by mistake. Maybe someone forgot to flag his profile. He didn't question it. Instead, he used it as an opportunity to observe what he had been cut off from. The floor buzzed with urgency. A long glass corridor led to an open concept workspace where groups 1 through 3 typed away on company-issued MacBooks, double monitors glowing, phones blinking. Langston, who still used his personal laptop from undergrad, took a slow step forward. He spotted a familiar face, Zoe, leaning over a desk with 2 VPs. She noticed him and smiled, but didn't wave. One VP looked over, confused. "He's the inventory guy, right?" he said, not bothering to whisper. "Probably lost." Langston turned back before they could say more. Back at his basement desk, he found an email flagged urgent from Human Resources. The subject line, Professional Conduct Concern. He opened it with a sinking chest. It accused him of making inappropriate comments to a senior colleague, unnamed. There were no details, no incident specified. Just a note that the company takes professionalism seriously and would appreciate improved discretion in shared workspaces. Langston reread it 5 times. He hadn't spoken to anyone in over a day. The only senior colleague he'd interacted with was the janitor, who complimented his tie. He started typing a response, asking for clarity, but stopped. What could he say? He was outnumbered, outranked, unseen. At lunch, Langston headed upstairs to the Intern Lounge, hoping to grab a sandwich and sit alone. As he entered, the room quieted slightly. 3 interns sitting near the fridge leaned in as he passed. One stage whispered, "I hear he got flagged by HR." Another laughed. Maybe he's not such a golden boy after all. Langston said nothing. As he reached for a soda, his hand brushed against a sheet of paper left on the counter. It was a mock Employee of the Month flyer, photoshopped with his face holding a mop. The title read, "Langston the Logistics King for Outstanding Service in Janitorial Excellence." His stomach dropped. He stuffed the paper into his pocket and left the lounge. In the hall, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Brent. "Hey man," he said mock-friendly. "Big day coming up. Presentation pitch selections. Probably gonna be a bloodbath." Langston didn't respond. Brent leaned closer. "Word of advice, stick to moving chairs. You make a mean equipment list." Langston's fists tightened. "You done?" he asked, voice low. Brent stepped back, grinning. "Just trying to help." Later that day, during a floor-wide town hall hosted by an executive director named Blake McCready, the top-performing interns were publicly acknowledged for early leadership. A large screen displayed their names and roles. Langston's name did appear, but under a different heading: Facilities Support Internship Compliance Team. The crowd chuckled. Langston sat in the back, heat crawling up his neck, wishing the chair beneath him would collapse. The final slide featured a Team Spirit Award. The prize was a framed mop spray-painted gold. Langston recognized the handle from the basement janitor's closet. At 4:17 p.m., as he returned to his desk, a message notification popped up on his screen. It was a forwarded thread between a few interns and one director. One message read, "Let's be honest, he's the diversity photo op. He's not even assigned a real mentor." Another followed, "He's probably the kind that'll sue us when he doesn't get an offer. Better keep distance." Langston's throat clenched. He clicked delete, but the words stayed burned into his vision. He walked to the restroom, splashed water on his face, and leaned on the sink. His reflection looked older, tired, more frayed than he remembered. A stall door opened behind him. A man stepped out, one of the senior managers. He paused, looked at Langston, and smirked. "Rough day, kid." Langston forced a neutral nod. The man walked past, adding over his shoulder, "Smile. You're lucky to be here." His inbox remained quiet since then. No apologies, no damage control from HR, no outreach from the mentorship team. It was clear, the company wasn't just turning a blind eye. It was complicit. As Langston passed the reception desk, the security guard on duty, a tall man with tired eyes, gave him a slow once-over. "ID," he said. Langston frowned. "I've been coming here for 3 weeks." The guard shrugged. New protocol. He scanned Langston's badge with a handheld device and handed it back without a word. The elevator ride to his floor felt slower than usual. When the doors opened, Langston stepped into an eerie silence. The usual hum of keystrokes and ringing phones was absent. His heart thudded quietly as he turned the corner toward his desk. Taped to the chair was a note written in black marker: "Property of diversity quotas." Next to it, a paper plate sat with 2 gnawed chicken bones and a ketchup packet, arranged deliberately. Langston froze, the blood rushing in his ears. He looked around. No one met his eyes. A few interns from another group whispered in a nearby cubicle, one stifling a laugh. Langston slowly removed the note, folded it once, then again, and slipped it into his bag. He picked up the plate with a napkin and walked to the break room to throw it away. Inside, Zoe stood by the espresso machine. She looked up, startled. "Hey," she said cautiously. "Rough start." He didn't respond. She watched him toss the plate and asked, "Was that directed at you?" Langston turned, expression flat. You think someone else got chicken bones today? She opened her mouth, closed it. You should report it, she said finally. Langston shook his head. To who? Later that morning, Langston received a calendar invite for a departmental compliance walkthrough. The note attached said, "Please bring visual inspection tools." Confused, he followed the location pin to the 38th floor. When he arrived, a tall man in facilities gear handed him a high-visibility vest and a clipboard. "You Price?" he asked. Langston nodded. "You're shadowing me today." Langston blinked. "I'm shadowing facilities?" The man shrugged. "Came from upstairs. Said you were good with inventory." For the next 2 hours, Langston followed the man through boiler rooms, server closets, even the building's rooftop HVAC unit. No one explained why. No one apologized. At lunch, Langston returned to the Intern Lounge. The moment he walked in, a small group at the back erupted in laughter. One of them had a phone held high, camera pointed his way. The laughter stopped as soon as he saw them, but not before someone muttered, "Oh look, it's Janitor Jesus." Langston turned and walked out without saying a word. In the afternoon, an all-hands meeting was scheduled in the East Conference Hall. As employees filled the seats, Langston found himself directed to the back row, near the catering setup. A few whispered jokes followed as he walked past, comments about trash bins and air fresheners. He clenched his jaw and took a seat, focusing on the speaker. The director at the front of the room began a presentation on employee excellence, complete with slideshows of interns working with senior advisors. Group 1 and 2 were praised for initiative, leadership, strategic vision. Group 4 was not mentioned. Not once. As the session ended, Langston stood to leave, but was intercepted by McCready, the same executive who had mocked him days ago. "Hey, Langston," he said loudly enough for nearby interns to hear. "Quick question. That gold mop, did you get to keep it?" There was a snicker behind him. Langston stared at the man, dead-eyed, and replied, "No, you're welcome to it." McCready smirked. "Attaboy, that's the spirit." On his way back to his desk, Langston passed a bulletin board covered with photos from a town hall. Someone had pinned a blown-up version of the mop award image, but Langston's face had been photoshopped onto it, exaggerated, cartoonish. A speech bubble had been added. "Clean up Wall Street one toilet at a time." Langston ripped the photo down and stuffed it into his satchel. Behind him, someone clapped slowly. He turned. It was Brent, standing with 2 others. "Relax, man. It's just jokes," Brent said. "Don't be so sensitive." Langston didn't answer. He took the stairs to the building's lowest level and stood for several minutes beside a janitor's closet, struggling to calm his racing pulse. By the time evening rolled around, Langston was back at his desk, staring at his computer screen without seeing it. He opened a spreadsheet, typed a few numbers, deleted them. The overhead lights buzzed softly. He checked the group chat again. A new post had appeared, a meme of a butler holding a tray. The caption, "Langston's post-internship role, serving drinks to people who got real offers." He told himself he just needed to endure, to survive the internship long enough to walk away with a letter of recommendation. Nothing else seemed possible now. As he passed through the metal detectors, the same security guard who checked his badge last week waved him through without looking up. It was a small mercy. He rode the elevator alone, his reflection fractured by the brushed steel of the doors. The moment he stepped off on his floor, he noticed something wrong. His desk, already the worst in the room, had been tampered with. His chair was gone. In its place stood a low stool, lopsided, too short, with a cracked seat cushion. Duct taped to the seat was a sticky note that read, "The throne of the king of logistics." Langston stood frozen for a moment, fingers twitching. He peeled the note off slowly, turned, and tossed it into the trash. Around him, keyboards clattered as if nothing had happened. At 10:30, while refilling his coffee in the break room, he heard snickering behind him. He turned just as Zoe stepped in with 2 others from Group 1. She offered a tight smile, but her eyes darted to something on the counter. Langston followed her gaze. Sitting beside the cream packets was a cheap plastic trophy, the kind handed out at kids' birthday parties. A label printed in Comic Sans read, "Best Floor Cleaner Langston Price." Next to it lay a mini broom with his name written in Sharpie on the handle. Langston said nothing. He picked them both up, walked to the trash can, and dropped them in. Zoe started to say something, then stopped. Back at his desk, he found a new task waiting. Update the company's internal asset map by manually checking each item in the basement storage vault. The email wasn't signed, just a task number. He didn't argue. He grabbed a clipboard, headed downstairs, and began the mindless, tedious process. It took 3 hours. When he returned, he found a post-it stuck to his monitor. "Gotta say you clean up nice." It wasn't signed. He removed it without a word. Just before lunch, Langston was called to Conference Room D by someone from the admin team. "You've been requested for a diversity panel," she said flatly. He frowned. "I didn't sign up for any panel." She shrugged. "They asked for you by name." In the room, several chairs were arranged in a semicircle. 2 interns, both from Group 3, sat beside a junior HR rep. The title projected on the screen read, DEI in Practice, Intern Perspectives. Langston sat down, wary. The discussion began. He wasn't asked a single question until the end, when the HR rep turned to him and said, "Langston, you've had some unique assignments. Can you talk about how those have prepared you for real-world obstacles?" The room went quiet. The question was a setup. The others smirked. Langston clenched his fists, then relaxed them. "They've taught me when to speak," he said carefully, "and when silence speaks louder." The room shifted uncomfortably. The HR rep chuckled nervously and moved on. That afternoon, Langston received a meeting invitation from Blake McCready. The subject line read, "Performance Feedback." It was scheduled for immediately. Langston walked in, heart tight. McCready gestured to a chair. "Langston, I've been hearing a lot about your attitude lately." Langston's brows furrowed. "Excuse me." McCready leaned forward. "You're not integrating well. You're isolated. That's not teamwork." Langston's voice was calm but pointed. "I've been assigned to basements, storage rooms, and fake panels. I haven't had a single strategic task." McCready's smile was tight. "That's your interpretation." Langston replied, "It's not an interpretation. It's documented." McCready waved a hand. "Let me offer you some advice. Stop taking things so personally. Play the game." Langston stood. "What game is that exactly?" McCready's eyes narrowed. "The one where you don't burn bridges before you've built any." Langston left without another word. When he returned to his desk, his keyboard was missing. In its place was a printed photo of him from the DEI panel, digitally altered to include a cartoon mop in his hand. The caption, "Langston cleans up." He took it, folded it, and didn't say a word. Near the end of the day, Langston entered the stairwell to get air. Inside, he found Zoe sitting on a step, phone in hand. She looked up, startled. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said. He nodded. "Needed space." She hesitated. "I saw what happened in the lounge. With the trophy." I didn't laugh. Langston stared at her. "But you didn't stop it." She lowered her gaze. "I know. I'm sorry." He didn't reply. After a long pause, she asked, "Why don't you say something?" "Go to HR." Langston laughed bitterly. "They already think I'm the problem. Speaking up would just confirm it." She nodded slowly, then stood. "Still, it's not right," he said. "That hasn't stopped anyone." Langston Price entered the office Tuesday morning with a quiet heaviness he couldn't shake. He had survived the previous week's gauntlet of slurs, mock trophies, and stage panels by retreating into a version of himself that barely spoke. He had made a decision not to fight, not yet, but to endure in silence, logging everything, recording what he could, and memorizing the rest. But on this day, as he swiped his badge at the front turnstile and received a neutral beep of approval, he sensed the atmosphere around him thickening. As he stepped into the elevator, he caught sight of 2 interns scrolling on a phone, then stifling laughs as they glanced in his direction. He said nothing. When he reached the 33rd floor, where he had been reassigned again, this time to documentation and archive support, his screen was already unlocked and active. That was strange. He never left it that way. As he sat down, a flood of message pings began to ring from his inbox. Teams chat, and internal messages all at once. He opened the first, a GIF of a rapper holding a gold mop. The caption read, "Langston's new mixtape, Mop God." Another message showed a doctored flyer for a fictional event, DI charity car wash featuring Langston. He'll scrub your equity clean. The messages came from burner accounts. No names, just the company email domain and shadowed icons. He closed each one, deleting, until the notification stopped. But it wasn't over. When he opened the internal portal to check his next assignment, a pop-up appeared. It wasn't from IT. It was a fabricated email made to look real, titled Langstons had passed distribution form. The message read, "All execs interested in acquiring cultural relevance should reach out to Langston Price, Chief DI Mascot. Get yours before Juneteenth." His heart pounded. Attached was a photo of him, cropped from a company picnic shot, crudely altered with chains and sunglasses drawn in. His phone buzzed next. It was a private message from a number he didn't recognize. It read, "You're lucky we don't make you wear the uniform." No name, no context, just venom. Langston stood slowly, breathing hard. Around him, no one reacted. He walked to the break room for water, and as he entered, the room grew tense. 3 interns got up and left, trying not to look him in the eye. As he reached the sink, he saw the reflection of a figure behind him in the metallic cabinet. It was Reese, one of the senior directors. Langston turned just as Talin stepped closer, smiling like a wolf. "You know, kid," Talin said, voice low, "you're drawing a lot of attention." Langston didn't reply. Talin leaned on the counter beside him. "If you want to make it here, you might want to stop acting like everyone's out to get you." Langston met his gaze. "I don't need to act. They are." Talin's smile faded. "Watch the attitude. This isn't Columbia. It's the real world." Langston walked past him without another word. By noon, Langston was called into HR. He entered the beige-walled office and sat down across from a woman named Melanie. She looked uncomfortable. "Langston, we received an anonymous complaint regarding your conduct." He didn't blink. "What conduct?" She shuffled papers. "There were allegations of inappropriate messaging and language sent from your terminal." He laughed, one bitter exhale. "You mean the ones targeting me?" Melanie didn't respond. "Langston, we just need to verify your compliance with company standards. Can you confirm you didn't initiate any offensive communications?" "No," he said flatly, "but I've received plenty. Do you have proof?" "Not anymore," he said. "They come and disappear." She nodded, clearly wanting to be done. "We're just documenting this for internal purposes. You may return to your tasks." He left without thanking her. When he returned to his desk, his inbox had been locked. His access to the internal portal had been suspended. A red alert bar flashed across his screen, restricted pending investigation. His mouse stopped working. His keyboard disconnected. He stared at the monitor as the cursor blinked. A coworker passed behind him, saw the screen, and whispered just loud enough to be heard, "Looks like the janitor got hacked." That afternoon, Langston received a text from Zoe. It read, "Are you okay? I heard what happened." "I'm sorry." He didn't reply. At 4:45, Langston walked into the elevator, intending to leave early for the first time since the internship began. But inside, a group of senior staff members were already present, including Talin. As the doors closed, someone muttered, "Don't worry, he's not cleaning the floors today." The others chuckled. Langston stood still, eyes forward. Then Talin leaned in just enough to be heard and said, "How does it feel to be the reason this company needs diversity training?" Langston turned, locked eyes with him, and said softly, "How does it feel to be the reason they have to fake culture?" The elevator stopped. Langston stepped off. He didn't go home. He went to the roof. The same roof they had all partied on during the second week. He stood alone, looking out at the skyline, feeling the wind press against him. He wasn't thinking about quitting anymore. He was thinking about how much they thought he was too weak to fight back. That was their mistake. Langston Price walked into the office on Wednesday morning with a different kind of weight on his shoulders. Not the dread of more harassment or the sting of fresh embarrassment, but the burden of calculated silence. He had reached a point where every breath felt like resistance, and every step across the firm's polished floors was an act of defiance. After yesterday's fabricated email scandal, after the HR inquiry and Talin's venomous whispers in the elevator, he knew there was no merit left to appeal to. The rules had never applied equally to him. But something unexpected had arrived in his inbox late that night, a calendar invite that made no sense at first. The title was simple: Client Strategy Review Q3 Forecast. The invite listed executives he had only seen from afar, including Vincent C. Bennett, the elusive CEO of Hawthorne and Roth. It was marked as mandatory, and to Langston's shock, his name was on the confirmed attendee list. He stared at the screen for almost 10 minutes, wondering if it was a trap, another sick joke. But the sender's email was real. It was from the strategy director's office. His room, his pitch. Somehow, they had added him. He didn't sleep that night. He pulled out the research he'd been compiling on his own time, the financial models, the emerging market trend reports, the optimization suggestions for the client portfolios that none of his so-called mentors had led him near. He stayed up cross-checking ratios, updating slide decks, and calculating new ROI projections using raw data he'd quietly copied from shared folders weeks earlier. Langston worked in silence, driven not by revenge, but by clarity. This was not about proving his worth. He already knew his worth. This was about exposing theirs. That morning, he arrived earlier than everyone else, suit crisp, shoes polished, nerves taut. When the glass doors to conference room A opened, he stepped in with steady purpose. The room was cavernous, filled with leather chairs and soft, indirect lighting. Large digital screens were already projecting graphs and client names. A team of interns from Group 1 was gathered at the far end, led by Zoe and Brent. They barely glanced at Langston, as if unable to compute what he was doing there. McCready stood near the far wall, holding a tablet, smirking as Langston took a seat. A few directors whispered to each other, clearly questioning the same thing. How had the intern from Group 4 ended up in this boardroom? The meeting began. A senior manager introduced the purpose of a session: to assess pitch readiness for an upcoming high-net-worth client portfolio expansion. Group 1 had been preparing for this all quarter. Zoe took the lead, running through slides with well-rehearsed confidence. Brent followed, tossing in a few buzzwords about acquisition channels and cross-market fluidity. It was polished, safe, predictable. Then, just as the director moved to wrap up, Langston raised his hand. For a moment, no one reacted. Then McCready snorted quietly. "Let's let him speak," Bennett said from the far end of the table, his first words since entering. The room stilled. Langston stood. His voice was calm, but carried. "I'd like to present an alternate analysis, if I may." A few eyes rolled. A few smirks twitched. But no one interrupted. He connected his laptop and began clicking through a fresh presentation, one no one had seen before. His models used real-time data overlays. His graphs projected longer-term gains based on behavioral segmentation. He highlighted client drop-off rates in secondary regions, linked them to marketing inefficiencies, and offered low-cost realignments that could recapture up to 18% of the churn within 2 quarters. He included strategy pivots that directly countered Group 1's recommendations, not with criticism, but with refinement. Every slide was bulletproof, every assumption footnoted. The room changed. Directors leaned forward. Bennett folded his hands and watched, unmoving. At one point, a VP whispered, "Where did he get this?" Another whispered back, "He built that on his own." When Langston clicked to the final slide, projected returns and compliance charts, he said, "All of this can be executed within existing budget allocations, using resources currently underleveraged, like the development division in Nashville." Silence followed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Bennett said, "Whose analysis is this?" Langston looked directly at him. "Mine. I've been compiling this for weeks. I wasn't invited to contribute to any strategy teams, so I made one." McCready recovered first. This wasn't authorized. He had no approval to access that data, but Bennett raised a hand, and McCready stopped mid-sentence. "Where did you learn to model like that?" Bennett asked. Langston replied, "Wharton, class of 23. That caused another ripple. Someone muttered, "He's Ivy." Another said, "No one mentioned that." Bennett continued, "Who assigned you to Group 4? Langston didn't hesitate. "Your office." The room went silent again. Bennett stood. Meeting adjourned. "Everyone but Langston, please leave." People shuffled out, confused, whispering. McCready lingered a moment too long before exiting. When the doors closed, Bennett looked at Langston and said, "What else have you documented?" Langston stepped forward, pulled a folder from his bag, and placed it on the table. Inside were printed screenshots, copied emails, and time-stamped chat logs, mockery, slurs, sabotage, fake emails, and internal jokes that had been circulating for weeks. "I didn't come here to expose anyone," Langston said. "I came here to learn. But what I've learned is who this company actually is. I recorded it all." Bennett said nothing for a full minute. Then he picked up the folder and began flipping through. His expression never changed. Finally, he said, "You're not an intern. You're a witness." Langston nodded. "Yes, sir." Each page turned sounded louder than it should have, crackling against the tension that blanketed the space. Outside the glass walls, the interns and directors, who'd just been dismissed, hovered in small clusters, peering in discreetly, wondering why the CEO would stay behind with an intern from a bottom tier, especially one whose name had been the punchline to so many internal jokes. Inside, Bennett didn't look up for several minutes, eyes scanning screenshots, email chains, Slack conversations, and audio transcripts Langston had transcribed by hand. After what felt like an hour, but was probably less than 10 minutes, Bennett finally set the folder down and looked directly at Langston, his gaze sharp and unreadable. "Tell me everything," he said. Langston took a breath. He started with day 1, the wrong badge, the assumptions at the welcome table, the whispered jokes, the orientation packets that never arrived. He told Bennett about being assigned to logistics, while others joined mergers and acquisition meetings, about the fake HR complaints and the deliberate photo croppings, the doctored memes that circulated with corporate watermarks still embedded. He detailed every act of humiliation with an even voice, without dramatics, letting the facts speak for themselves. Then he explained the turning point, the moment he'd realized no one was coming to help, that HR existed to protect the company, not its interns, and that excellence alone would never be enough. He described how he began recording, how he used his own cloud storage, anonymized his sources, and cross-referenced every event to prevent dismissal as hearsay. He admitted he had nearly quit more than once. But each time, the silence of his own dignity being eroded forced him to stay, because someone had to see. Someone had to know. He finally ended by explaining that his final pitch presentation had not been an act of showmanship, but an act of last resort. "I wasn't trying to outshine anyone," he said. "I was trying to be seen for who I actually am." Bennett leaned back in his chair, eyes still fixed on Langston. Then he reached for the speakerphone and pressed a button. "Mary," he said, addressing his executive assistant, "clear my afternoon. And pull Langston Price's full personnel file, intern application, academic transcripts, everything. Also, bring in the footage from the 33rd floor security cams for the past 6 weeks. All of it. And patch me through to HR and legal." Mary's voice crackled in, "Yes, sir." Right away. Langston stood motionless. The moment felt surreal. Bennett looked up again. Langston Price, spelled with a Y. Why didn't I recognize that name sooner? Langston gave a faint, uncertain nod. Bennett's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're Robert Price's son, Bob Price. We co-founded a fintech council together 12 years ago." Langston's expression tightened, surprised. "He never mentioned you were here." Bennett nodded. "We haven't spoken in a few years. But he always said if his son ever came through this firm, he wouldn't need special treatment. He said you'd show up on your own merit. I see now why he trusted that." Langston swallowed hard. "I never wanted legacy points. I just wanted a fair shot." Bennett stood. "And you've more than earned it." The CEO walked to the door, opened it, and motioned for a man waiting outside to enter. It was Colin Ror, the firm's chief legal officer. "Colin," Bennett said, "review these documents." We're preparing a case against 4 directors and possibly an HR lead. Possible Title VII violations, hostile environment, discriminatory practices, and cover-up attempts. Rourke flipped through the pages, his brows rising slowly. This came from an intern. Bennett nodded. Not just an intern, a structural mirror. He turned to Langston. What you've done here, it's going to redefine how this company understands accountability. Langston remained quiet, trying to absorb the magnitude of what was happening. For the first time in months, someone was not just listening, they were acting. The CEO turned again to his assistant over the intercom. Also, schedule an internal press statement. We're launching a zero-tolerance investigation, and I want Langston involved in designing the new cultural review protocols. Effective immediately. Langston blinked. Sir, I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to take anyone's job. Bennett shook his head. You didn't take anyone's job. You exposed a vacuum where integrity was supposed to live. And now you're going to help us fix that. Over the next few hours, Langston found himself pulled into a swirl of meetings he never expected to attend. The legal team asked for his input. The PR division asked for his discretion. HR leadership, visibly pale, was called in and informed of pending disciplinary measures. Executives who'd once ignored him now offered curt nods or avoided his gaze entirely. As news spread quietly through the ranks that Langston had not only given a better presentation than Group 1, but had been summoned by the CEO himself, the atmosphere shifted. Gone were the whispers of janitor jokes and mop awards. Now there was only uncertainty and a slowly dawning sense of reckoning. By evening, Langston was in Bennett's private office overlooking the skyline, sipping coffee that tasted less like office brew and more like vindication. You're going to lead something important, Langston, Bennett said. We've needed a hard reset for years. I just didn't realize it would come from the one person we tried hardest to overlook. Langston nodded slowly. Then maybe that's where change has to start, from the bottom, where people can't fake who they are. Bennett smiled. Tomorrow morning, we make it public. The building didn't buzz with gossip that morning. It throbbed with something deeper, a corporate unease that seeped beneath polished shoes and designer collars. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was uncertainty, a crack in the marble foundation they'd all taken for granted. At exactly 9 a.m., an email swept through Hawthorne and Roth's internal servers like a shockwave. The subject line was clinical, almost sterile. Executive action and organizational review, effective immediately. Employees across all 47 floors froze, screens glowing with the message's cold authority. It came directly from CEO Vincent C. Bennett. He didn't delegate. He didn't dilute. He spoke with clarity and finality. The contents of the memo were brief but volcanic. An internal investigation had uncovered sustained breaches of professional conduct, ethical violations, and systemic disregard for compliance protocols. 4 senior executives were terminated, effective immediately. Their names weren't listed, but everyone knew. Then came the real shock. $3.1 billion in projected performance bonuses were canceled across top-tier leadership. Not delayed, not trimmed, gone. That figure had been whispered for weeks, tied to the quarterly performance that those same executives used to justify their unchecked behavior. Now it was ashes, publicly redirected into an accountability reserve, a new oversight and cultural compliance body that would report directly to the CEO. The firm hadn't just been embarrassed, it had been gutted from the top. And behind that clean, deliberate purge stood one name, unspoken in the memo, but now unavoidable in every conversation: Langston Price. The shift was immediate. Office chatter turned hushed. Laughter died in throats. Screens were turned away when Langston passed. Not because he demanded it, he said nothing. He simply walked down hallways like a man who'd never asked for war, but survived one anyway. Executives who had once ignored his existence now avoided his gaze. The same HR rep who had asked him if he misinterpreted a joke was escorted out by security with a sealed envelope. Brent was reassigned to the compliance desk with no explanation. He left 2 days later, offering no goodbyes. Talin submitted his resignation via encrypted email, and deleted every trace of his corporate identity before lunch. McCready, smirking, untouchable McCready, was walked out in silence. No farewell speech, no retirement toast, just a flash of his badge being disabled and the click of the glass doors behind him. The interns who once laughed the loudest avoided eye contact. Their group chat went dark. One of them deleted the memes they had once created, hoping no one had saved copies. Langston didn't gloat. He didn't post cryptic quotes or subtweet the fall of those who tried to erase him. He worked. He arrived early, reviewed compliance frameworks, audited outdated training modules. When Bennett summoned him to a private meeting that afternoon, Langston brought proposals, anonymous bias reporting tools, rotational mentorship models, and mandatory equity training tied to performance reviews. He wasn't there to punish. He was there to build something that wouldn't allow what he endured to happen again. "You could have walked away," Bennett said, studying him across the long oak conference table. "Why didn't you?" Langston didn't hesitate. "Because this firm gave me every reason to believe it wouldn't care, and I needed to make sure it didn't get to choose that anymore." That night, a press release hit the wires. Hawthorne and Roth implements unprecedented structural reforms after culture review. It went global in minutes. Business channels dissected every paragraph. The $3.1 billion figure made headlines. Analysts debated the impact on market trust. Social feeds exploded with speculation. But beneath the media frenzy, within the company's own walls, the tone had shifted. Not everyone liked it. Some resented it. Others whispered about performative gestures. But no one dared return to the old ways. Because the system had changed, and Langston Price had become its living proof. In the cafeteria, the table where Group 1 once held court sat mostly empty. Zoe still came to work, but quieter now. She joined the reform committee without being asked. She volunteered to lead onboarding for next year's interns. And one morning, she approached Langston with a simple statement. "I see it now. I should have spoken up." Langston didn't reply right away. He let the silence stretch. Then he nodded. "Then speak louder next time." She did. Even the firm's internal tools began to reflect the shift. The company's intranet, once flooded with self-congratulating posts, now highlighted equity workshops, mentorship spotlights, and anonymous storytelling from employees of every level. Langston read them. All of them. He wasn't chasing credit, he was measuring impact. And every time someone told the truth under their real name, he marked it as a sign that the culture was no longer unchallengeable. The fallout wasn't clean. Culture never changes overnight. But the fear of exposure became a force that kept the worst instincts in check. Langston didn't weaponize it. He anchored it in policy. He led training not from PowerPoint decks, but from experience, inviting others to speak, to own their failures, and to help redesign the system they had once allowed to rot. He received letters, some apologetic, others defensive. One came from a former executive, unsigned, admitting, "We assumed you'd either quit or stay silent. We never imagined you'd be the one holding the mirror." Langston kept that one, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. And yet, for all the institutional change, the most lasting consequences weren't in the boardroom. They were in the behavior. Directors now looked up when interns entered the room. Meetings began with names pronounced correctly. Feedback was no longer code forfeit. The language of the firm was shifting. Slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Langston never asked for a promotion. He never needed one. But he was offered a seat on the new executive oversight board 6 months later. He accepted with conditions. No photo ops. No empty gestures. Just work. Real, sustained, uncomfortable work. He stayed late more often than not because he had something to prove, but because he now had something to protect. The season turned. Summer's heat cooled, and with it, the firestorm that had engulfed Hawthorne and Roth began to settle into something quieter, something reflective. Langston Price remained at the firm, but no longer in the shadows of mailrooms or the silent corners of the basement. His office was now on the 44th floor, a modest glass-paneled space nestled beside the executive wing, not lavish, not ostentatious, but functional, forward-facing, and visible. He didn't ask for a view, but he got one, and sometimes in the quiet of early mornings, he stood by the window and watched the city pulse with ambition and conflict, just as it always had. But now, something was different. Under Langston's guidance, the Integrity and Inclusion Task Force didn't become a bureaucratic buffer. It became a scalpel. He refused to let it be neutered by hollow slogans or repackaged into corporate branding. He demanded data. He demanded transparency. He insisted that diversity wasn't about optics. It was about opportunity, ownership, and equal access to mistakes and victories. The firm had no choice but to change because Langston no longer asked. He required. He designed a rotating mentorship initiative that embedded senior leaders with interns across all backgrounds and disciplines. He implemented blind recruitment stages that stripped away names, schools, and zip codes, forcing decision-makers to evaluate substance over assumption. Most importantly, he trained people to see, not just to recognize bias, but to confront the silence that enables it. And slowly, as weeks turned to months, the company began to breathe differently. Then came a day that Langston had not expected. It was a crisp Friday morning when Zoe, once silent and complicit, knocked on his office door. She carried with her a binder and a tremble in her voice. "Can I show you something?" she asked. He nodded. She laid out a proposal, a scholarship fund jointly created with the firm, aimed at supporting students from underserved communities who sought careers in finance. But it wasn't just the fund. It was the name she had listed on the proposal's founding board. Hers, 2 other interns from Group 1, and Langstons. "We should have done more," she said quietly. "Now we will." Langston didn't speak at first. He read every page, flipped every tab, and then looked up. "This isn't about erasing what happened," he said. "This is about building what should have happened. And if we're going to do that, it needs to be honest. No whitewashing. No savior angles." She nodded. "That's why I'm here." Together, they took it to Bennett, who approved it within the week. Another surprise came in the form of a letter, handwritten, delivered to Langston's desk in an envelope, without a return address. It was from Brent. Inside were 3 sentences. "I was cruel. I was afraid of losing a game I thought I'd already won. I'm trying to become someone who doesn't need to win at someone else's expense." Langston folded the note and stored it in a drawer. He didn't respond. Not yet. But he kept the letter. Later that month, Langston was invited to speak at a leadership summit for rising Black professionals in corporate spaces. He stood on a stage before hundreds, lights bright but not blinding, the silence expectant. When he spoke, his voice didn't thunder, it resonated. "When I arrived at this firm, I believed my performance would protect me. I believed the system just needed proof of my potential. What I learned is that systems don't respond to merit, they respond to accountability. I was set up to fail, not because of who I am, but because of who others assumed I had to be. And yet, here I stand, not as a symbol, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder. Justice is not a sentiment, it's a structure, and structures must be rebuilt." The crowd stood in silence, then applause. But for Langston, the moment was not victory. It was responsibility. On the 1-year anniversary of the scandal, the firm released a public transparency report. It detailed not just what had changed, but what hadn't, acknowledging that real transformation takes time and ongoing confrontation. Langston insisted that the report include failure points. "We're not here to look good," he told the communications director. "We're here to be better." And better, slowly, they became. That day, Langston visited the old basement where he had once been banished, with clipboards and broken chairs. It had been renovated since, brighter, cleaner, and no longer used for intern overflow. He walked its length slowly, letting memories settle and then dissipate. At the far end, he found the janitor who had once complimented his tie, now leaning on a mop, surprised to see him. "Didn't think you'd come back down here," the man said. Langston smiled. "I never really left. This is where I learned to see everything." As he returned to his office that evening, Langston paused in the hallway and looked at the nameplate beside his door. It didn't matter that it had changed titles. What mattered was that it was no longer spelled wrong. No more jokes. No more silence. Just truth. Truth earned through pain. And now carried with purpose. The journey was not over. Injustice didn't vanish because someone stood up. It adapted, found new forms, new masks. But Langston Price had found his footing, not as a token or a victim, but as a force. He had turned humiliation into instruction, cruelty into policy, and silence into structure. And in doing so, he had delivered a message that now rippled beyond the firm, beyond Wall Street, beyond industry. Arrogance may ignore the unseen, but justice will not. The end. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more powerful narratives that challenge injustice and spotlight redemption, make sure to like and subscribe to stay updated. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about Langston's journey and the way the story unfolded? Was there a particular moment that struck you the most? Also, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite twist or character transformation. Your feedback helps shape future stories.